More than 60 years ago, in the peaceful land of Finland, a tragedy unfolded that would haunt the nation for generations. It was the dawn of the 1960s, a time of hope, freedom, and youth. But on June 5, 1960, at a quiet lakeside called Bodom, that innocence was destroyed forever. For young friends, Nils Gustafsson, Seppo Boman, Mila Ermeli Björklund, and Anja Talikimaki, set out for a weekend of camping, laughter, and summer skies. They expected a night of joy under the stars. But by sunrise, 3 of them were dead. Only one survived, beaten, bleeding, and broken. The case would become one of Finland's greatest mysteries. A story of unanswered questions, missing evidence, and haunting shadows that stretch across time. What really happened at Lake Bodom? And who was the man that walked out of the fog that night? Saturday, June 4, 1960. The warm breath of summer had finally reached the forests of Espoo, a quiet Finnish town surrounded by endless pine trees. The air smelled of moss and gasoline, as 2 motorcycles raced down a winding dirt road. On the first bike rode 18-year-old Nils Gustafsson. Behind him, his girlfriend Mila Ermeli Björklund held tightly, her hair fluttering in the wind. The second bike followed close behind, Seppo Boman and Anja Talikimaki, laughing as the engines roared through the still forest. They were young, wild, and alive. The year was 1960, rock music was spreading across Europe. And for these 4 Finnish teenagers, life was just beginning. They stopped briefly in the nearby town to buy beer, candy, and a few cigarettes. Locals glanced at them suspiciously. Strangers rarely came this way, especially ones making so much noise. Still, the group didn't care. This was their weekend of freedom, away from parents, from school, from everything. By evening, they reached Lake Bodom, a tranquil mirror of water surrounded by thick forest. The lake stretched wide and silent, reflecting the fading orange sky. Nils killed the engine, and the sudden silence was almost eerie. Only the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves broke the air. They set up their tent near the water's edge. A small gray canvas that fluttered gently in the wind. They unpacked sandwiches, cheap wine, and a radio that played faint Finnish pop songs. Laughter echoed across the still surface of the lake. Anja threw pebbles into the water. Mila teased Seppo for being too serious. The night deepened, and one by one, stars began to appear. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl cried. The sound startled Mila for a moment, but then she laughed it off. No one could imagine that something terrible was already watching them. As midnight approached, a mist began to roll across the lake. The campfire burned low, and the group finally crawled into their tent. The world outside turned silent again. Just the soft lapping of water and the whisper of wind. Then, around 4 in the morning, something stirred in the shadows. A distant rustle. A quiet step. The tent moved slightly, as if touched by an unseen hand. But the 4 campers were fast asleep. Moments later, a faint tearing sound broke the silence. The thin fabric of the tent ripped open. And a sudden, violent storm of screams shattered the stillness of Lake Bodom. By sunrise, 3 of them would be dead. And the calm waters of Bodom would never look peaceful again. At 11 a.m., a carpenter named Esko Johansson and his young son walked along the lake's edge, the morning sun glimmering on the calm surface. They noticed a gray tent lying half-collapsed near the water. At first, they thought it had simply fallen overnight, until Esko saw something dark staining the ground. When he stepped closer, the metallic smell of blood filled the air. The tent's fabric was torn, soaked through with red. Inside lay a nightmare no one could ever forget. Within an hour, police officers rushed to the scene. What they found was chaos frozen in time. Inside the tent, Seppo Boiman and Anya Talikimaki were dead, beaten and stabbed again and again, their bodies tangled in sleeping bags. Outside, on the cold earth, Mila Ermeli Björklund, Nils's girlfriend, lay half undressed, her body mutilated beyond recognition. The air was still. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. And yet, miraculously, one person was still breathing. Nils Gustafsson, the only survivor, was found half inside the tent, covered in blood. His jaw shattered, his cheek split open to the bone, and his skull fractured by a crushing blow. He was barefoot, barely alive, and completely unconscious. Rescuers rushed him to the hospital. Doctors later said that if he had been found even 30 minutes later, he would have died on the spot. Investigators soon realized the killer had attacked from the outside. Each strike had pierced the tent's thin fabric, fast, brutal, and deliberate. The murderer knew exactly what they were doing, as if driven by pure rage. But the murder weapons, a knife and a blunt object, were gone. Not a single fingerprint, not a single footprint survived the trampling of curious locals who had already wandered too close. Among the confusion, officers discovered something bizarre. A pillowcase, tied tightly with an elastic band, hidden near the campsite. Inside were traces of blood and semen. And when tested, the fluids matched none of the 4 victims. To make matters worse, the police made a disastrous mistake. They never secured the area. Photographers, reporters, and onlookers walked freely among the bodies, destroying vital clues forever. Only one photograph from the original scene still exists today. A haunting reminder of how fragile the truth can be. Later that afternoon, officers found Nils's shoes, lying deep in the woods nearly 500 meters away. They were covered in mud and blood, as if someone had deliberately thrown them there to hide them. But why? Who would take the time to move them so far from the crime scene? The answer, like so many things at Lake Bodom, would vanish into silence. When Nils finally woke in the hospital, the world around him felt blurred and hollow. Bright lights stung his eyes. The smell of disinfectant burned his nose. He tried to speak, but his jaw was wired shut. Days passed. The police came to question him again and again. Each time, the same answer: he remembered nothing. Not the screams. Not the faces. Not the killer. Nothing at all. Doctors confirmed the trauma to his head was severe enough to cause memory loss. But as weeks went on, detectives began to suspect something darker. How could the only survivor remember absolutely nothing? Was he protecting someone? Or was he the one who needed protection from his own guilt? Desperate for answers, investigators turned to an unusual idea: hypnosis. It was controversial, even back then, but they had no better lead. If his conscious mind had forgotten, maybe his subconscious still remembered. Under dim lights, Nils sat in a wooden chair, breathing slowly as the hypnotist's voice guided him deeper and deeper into his memories. At first, only fragments appeared: the smell of smoke from the campfire, the sound of rippling water. Then, something sharper. A scream. A ripping sound, like fabric tearing. He saw flashes, hands covered in blood, a shape moving outside the tent. And then, a face. The man, Nils whispered through clenched teeth, had light-colored hair. Pale, almost golden. His eyes were wide, cold, furious. The hypnotist asked him to focus, to remember every detail. The man held something, a knife, and maybe a pipe. The moonlight gleamed across the blade as it cut through the thin fabric. He could hear Mila's voice begging, the chaos, the pain, the darkness closing in. When Nils awoke, his heart raced. A sketch artist quickly drew what he described. It showed a tall man, about 30, with sharp features, a narrow face, and blonde hair that fell just above his eyes. The drawing was eerie, almost lifelike. When shown to locals, some claimed they'd seen that man near the lake before the murders. Others swore they saw him at the funeral of the victims, standing at the back, silent, his cold eyes fixed on the coffins. When the service ended, he was gone. No one knew who he was. And no one ever saw him again. The man with the blonde hair had become a ghost. For years, the case haunted Finland. It dominated newspaper headlines, whispered through bars and schools. A chilling reminder that even the safest places could hide monsters. The police interviewed thousands of people, hunters, fishermen, drifters, but no answers came. Eventually, 3 names emerged. 3 possible killers. The first was Carl Gillström. He owned a small kiosk near Lake Bodom, where he sold candy, ice cream, and cigarettes to locals. But his reputation was far from sweet. Carl was known as the Madman of Bodom, infamous for chasing away campers with rocks and insults. He despised outsiders, especially noisy teenagers. Neighbors recalled that Carl often warned people not to camp by the water, claiming the lake didn't like strangers. He was short-tempered, heavy drinking, and had been accused of assault before. After the murders, Carl's behavior grew increasingly strange. He refused to speak to anyone. Then abruptly filled in the old well behind his house, without explanation. A few days later, he drowned himself in Lake Bodom. Rumors spread that before his death, he had confessed to a neighbor, saying, "I did something terrible at the lake." But the neighbor dismissed it as drunken talk. When police searched his property, they found nothing, no weapons, no evidence. And with Carl dead, the truth sank beneath the surface forever. The second suspect was Hans Assmann, a German man with a mysterious past, living quietly in Helsinki. 2 days after the murders, he appeared at a hospital. Disheveled, agitated, and covered in what looked like dried blood. His fingernails were black with grime. His shirt and pants were wrinkled and stained red. Nurses described him as wild-eyed and aggressive. And when he learned that police were investigating, he panicked and fled the hospital before they could question him. When journalists later saw Hans's photo, they were stunned. He looked almost identical to the police sketch of the man with the blonde hair. His background made him even more suspicious. Some believed he was a former Nazi SS officer who escaped after the war. Others whispered that he was a Soviet double agent, living in Finland under a false name. Hans's car matched one seen near the lake that night. But when questioned, he calmly produced an alibi. He'd been with his mistress the entire night. Her brother confirmed it. The case against him collapsed. Hans smirked at the accusations. And for the rest of his life, he enjoyed the rumors, even hinting in interviews that he knew what really happened at Lake Bodom. He died in 1998, taking whatever truth he held to the grave. And finally, the third suspect. Nils Gustafsson himself. The survivor. The only living witness. The boy who walked away. For decades, Nils was seen as a victim. But in 2004, everything changed. "44 years after the murders, the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation reopened the case using advanced DNA analysis. New tests on the bloodied tent, clothes, and shoes revealed something unexpected. They claimed Nils's blood was absent from certain objects that should have been soaked with it, while traces of the victim's blood appeared on his belongings. Investigators built a shocking new theory. That Nils, intoxicated and jealous, had argued with Mila and snapped. In a drunken rage, he killed his friends and wounded himself to cover the crime. The media exploded. For the first time, the boy who had been pitted for 40 years was called a murderer. The trial began in 2005. Nils, now 63, gray-haired and quiet, sat in the courtroom with trembling hands. He denied everything. "I loved them," he said softly. "I would never hurt them." Experts took the stand, debating over the evidence. The prosecution painted him as a jealous lover. But the defense showed that Nils's head wound was so severe that his brain fluid had leaked. An injury impossible to fake. Even the blood pattern analysis told a different story. Someone else had likely worn Nils's shoes during the murders, then abandoned them far away to mislead investigators. After months of testimony, the verdict came. Nils Gustafsson was found not guilty. The court apologized. He was granted compensation, but not peace. His life had been defined by one night he could never remember. And one mystery no one could ever solve. Decades passed. The survivors aged, witnesses died. And Lake Bodom became less a crime scene and more a legend. Then, in 2019, scientists took one last look at the evidence. The blood-stained pillowcase found beside the tent. Using modern DNA technology, they uncovered something astonishing. A fifth DNA profile. Belonging to no known victim, no officer, no suspect. Someone else had been there. An unknown presence, frozen in the fabric of history. Investigators turned once more to the old names. Could it be Carl? No DNA survived from him. Could it be Hans? Possibly. His son volunteered his father's glasses. Old, dusty, and marked with two dark specks near the lens. The lab ran the tests. The result? The blood wasn't from any of the victims. But it didn't match the fifth DNA either. Another dead end. To this day, no one knows who left that DNA at the scene. A fifth shadow at Lake Bodom. No murder weapon was ever found. No confession was ever made. Only a haunting sketch of a pale-haired man remains. His cold eyes staring from an old police file. A ghost forever trapped between truth and nightmare. And sometimes, when the mist creeps low across the lake, locals say they can still see him. A figure standing silently by the shore, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. Some say it's the spirit of guilt. Others say it's the murderer, waiting to be found. But perhaps, it's the lake itself, remembering what the world has long tried to forget. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel so we have the motivation to make more videos.